You'll understand when you're older, my mother said, adjusting the pearl necklace around her throat without looking at me. Some people are built to carry the torch. Others are built to hold the door open. She said this on the night of my brother's engagement party, the night my father stood up in front of 60 guests and announced that Derek would be taking over the family investment firm. She said it the way someone explains weather to a child. Matter of fact. Unblinking. As if the sentence didn't just rewrite the last 8 years of my life. I was standing 3 feet away, holding a tray of champagne glasses I had personally arranged because the caterer had called in sick and I had driven 40 minutes to pick up the order myself. Derek was center stage, laughing, clinking glasses, wearing a suit I was fairly certain my father had bought him. He hadn't arranged a single thing that evening. He hadn't even arrived on time. But Derek was the torch carrier. And I was the door holder. I smiled. I set the tray down. I excused myself to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the marble sink, and told myself to breathe. Before I tell you what I found in my father's study 3 days later, and exactly what I did about it, I want you to know one thing. I did not grow up believing I was unloved. I grew up believing I had to earn it. There's a difference. And it took me until I was 29 years old, sitting on a cold bathroom floor at my brother's engagement party, to finally understand that one is hope and the other is a trap. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this reaches. My name is irrelevant to this story. What matters is what I built, and what was nearly taken from me. I'm the older child by 4 years. I finished school early, put myself through a financial planning certification while working full-time at a regional bank. And by 26, I had built a client portfolio that was generating more revenue than most associates twice my age. 2 years after that, my father asked me to come work for the family firm. He called it an opportunity. He said he needed someone he could trust. I thought he meant me. What he actually needed was a system. Someone to modernize the backend, to digitize 15 years of paper client records, to rebuild the compliance infrastructure from scratch, after the firm had quietly settled a regulatory issue I wasn't told about until I was already 6 months in. He needed a fixer, and I was good at fixing things. So I fixed them. I spent 2 years rebuilding that firm from the inside out. I restructured 4 client accounts that were hemorrhaging money. I brought in 2 major referral partnerships. I worked weekends. I skipped vacations. I told myself it was an investment. That when Derek eventually graduated and came in as a junior associate, I would already be a partner, already have my name somewhere permanent, already have proved that I was worth the torch, not just the door. Derek came in on a Monday. By Friday, my father had moved his office to the corner suite. The one with the view. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Derek needed to find his footing and I should be patient and that family businesses had complicated dynamics and none of this meant what I thought it meant. Then the engagement party happened. Then my father stood up and said Derek would lead the firm into its next chapter. Then my mother told me some people carry torches and some people hold doors. And something very quiet, very deep inside me, finally went still. The drive home that night was 43 minutes of silence. I didn't call anyone. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove with both hands on the wheel and I thought about the $34,000 I had put into the firm's emergency reserve fund 2 years ago when the compliance issue resurfaced and my father said they were short. I thought about how he had paid it back in installments, stopping after the 3rd payment, never mentioning it again. I thought about how I had never pushed, because pushing felt disloyal. Because I had been taught that loyalty was the price of belonging. By the time I parked outside my apartment, I wasn't angry. I was something colder than angry. I was clear. 3 days after the party, my father called me into his study. He said he needed help preparing the transition documents. He wanted to formalize Derek's role as managing partner, and since I had built most of the firm's current infrastructure, it would be easier if I walked the attorney through the operational systems. He said it in the voice he used when he was asking me to do something he knew wasn't fair but was counting on me to do anyway. That particular voice had worked on me for 29 years. I said yes. I sat down with the attorney. I walked him through the compliance systems, the client portfolio structure, the referral agreements I had negotiated, the digital archive I had built. I was professional and thorough, and the entire time, something in the back of my mind was very quietly taking notes. Because while I was pulling up system after system to demonstrate how they worked, I noticed something the attorney wasn't paying attention to, but I was. The referral partnership agreements I had negotiated with both outside firms, they were signed under my name. Not the firm's name. Mine. Because when I had set them up, we weren't yet a registered partnership under the new compliance structure, and the outside firms had required a licensed individual as the signing party. My father had known this at the time. He had told me to sign, and we would transfer the agreements later, when the registration finalized. He had never transferred them, which meant that technically, legally, those agreements still belonged to me. I did not say a word about this in the meeting. I asked the attorney one clarifying question, framed as a procedural detail, and he confirmed what I already suspected. I thanked everyone for their time. I went home. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started reading contract law for the next 4 hours. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel like a mastermind. I felt tired and sad and a little bit sick, the way you feel when you find out something you already knew but had been working very hard not to know. I had built something real. I had given it to people who were never going to give me credit for it. And now I had to decide whether I was going to keep holding the door or walk through it. I called my friend Renata. She's a contract attorney. We went to school together, lost touch, reconnected 3 years ago over a work thing. She's the kind of person who asks exactly the right questions and doesn't waste time on the wrong ones. I explained the situation in broad terms. The signing structure, the failed transfer, the transition that was now being formalized without me. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I respect most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So, you're telling me they're about to formalize a managing partner transition on a firm whose 2 most valuable external agreements are still legally attached to you personally?" "Yes," I said. "That's what I'm telling you." She said she'd look at the documents by morning. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and thought about Derek, who I actually don't hate, which maybe sounds strange given everything. Derek isn't cruel. He's not calculating. He's just comfortable in a way that comes from never having been asked to prove anything. He grew up knowing the torch was his, and so he never learned to carry weight. He's not a villain. He's just the person who benefited most from a system that was designed around him, and now that system was about to cost me everything I had built. I thought about my mother's face at the party. The way she had looked at me with that particular mixture of fondness and dismissal that I had spent my entire childhood trying to decode. She loved me in the way you love a reliable appliance. She appreciated what I did. She just never saw it as exceptional because exceptional, in her framework, was Derek's category. I was capable. He was gifted. The distinction had been made so early and so quietly that I don't think she even knew she was making it anymore. I thought about the $34,000 and the installment payments that stopped. I thought about the 2 years I had given to rebuilding that firm, and the corner office with the view that I had walked past every single day. I thought about the engagement party and my father's voice ringing out across 60 guests and Derek clinking his glass and my mother adjusting her pearls. And then I stopped thinking about all of it because Renata had texted me. "Call me when you're up. We have something to work with." She had reviewed the agreements. Both referral partnerships had been signed under my individual license number, not the firm's. The language in both contracts specified that in the event of a transfer to a corporate entity, the transfer required written consent from the original signing party. There was no record of that consent being requested. There was no record of a transfer being initiated at all. Without my consent, those agreements couldn't be moved. Without those agreements, the firm's projected revenue for the next fiscal year dropped by roughly 40%. Without that revenue, the transition valuation my father had given Derek, the one Derek's fiancé's family was apparently using as a basis for their own financial planning, was significantly overstated. The pitch meeting with the new outside investors, the one my father had scheduled for 2 weeks out to formally announce Derek's leadership and raise expansion capital, was built on numbers that assumed those agreements were part of the firm's assets. Renata laid all of this out to me in the calm, organized way she has of presenting information. When she finished, I asked her what my options were. She said I had several. I could give consent to transfer the agreements and walk away with nothing. I could withhold consent and watch the meeting fall apart. Or I could contact the partner firms directly, explain the situation, and renegotiate the agreements under new terms that actually reflected my contribution. There was a fourth option, she said. And I could tell from her voice that this was the one she actually thought I should consider. I could contact my father before the investor meeting. Give him the opportunity to make this right before it became a legal matter. I thought about that for a long time. Then I thought about my mother's voice. Some people carry the torch. Others hold the door. I told Renata I wanted to be in the room when the investors arrived. She looked at me over the phone silence for a moment and then said, "Then let's make sure you have a seat at the table." The next 11 days were the quietest I have ever been in my professional life. I went into the office every morning. I did my work. I answered my emails. I helped Derek navigate a client question he didn't know how to answer, which he thanked me for with genuine warmth because Derek is not a bad person. He just doesn't understand what he doesn't know. My father nodded at me across conference tables, and I nodded back. My mother called once to ask if I was bringing anything to Sunday dinner. I said yes. I brought a green bean casserole. I sat at the table. I listened to my father talk about the investor meeting with the specific energy of a man who believes everything is already decided. I watched Derek reach across the table to refill my mother's water glass and my mother beam at him the way she had never quite beamed at me, and I ate my dinner and I was very, very calm. Renata had sent formal letters to both referral partner firms, citing the transfer clause and confirming that no consent had been provided. Both firms had responded. One had forwarded the letter to their legal department. The other had called Renata directly to ask how they should proceed. She had explained the situation professionally and without drama, and both firms had agreed to hold on any further engagement with the transition until the matter was clarified. My father did not know this yet. The investor meeting was at a downtown hotel, the kind of place with heavy carpet and oil paintings, and a general atmosphere of seriousness that was meant to convey that serious things happened here. I arrived 20 minutes early in a blazer I had bought specifically for this occasion. Not because I needed the confidence. Because I wanted to look like someone who had planned to be there. My father saw me in the lobby. For a half second, his expression didn't know what to do with itself. Then he arranged it into something neutral, and walked toward me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I was invited," I said. "By the Hartwell Group." The Hartwell Group was one of the referral partner firms. After Renata's letter, they had reached out to me directly. They said they wanted to understand the organizational changes before the investor meeting because the agreements they had signed were with me personally and they needed to know who they were actually working with going forward. I had taken the meeting. I had explained what I knew, professionally and factually. And at the end of that meeting, the senior partner had asked me whether I would be open to a conversation about my own future plans. I said I was open to many conversations. He had asked his team to add me to the investor meeting attendee list as an independent consultant with a relationship interest in the proceedings. My father stared at me in the hotel lobby. Behind him, Derek was coming through the revolving door with his fiancée on his arm, laughing at something she had said. He saw me, and his smile became uncertain. The way it does when he senses something he doesn't fully understand. "This isn't appropriate," my father said, quietly, the way he said things he wanted to sound reasonable but meant as commands. "The Hartwell Group disagrees," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. I watched him calculate. He was good at calculations when they involved money and professional positioning. Where he had always underestimated me was in calculating will. He had mistaken my patience for passivity for so long that it had genuinely not occurred to him that the two were different things. "We'll talk after," he said. "We will," I agreed. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. I sat at the far end of the table as a consultant, which meant I listened more than I spoke, which suited me fine. My father presented the firm's history and trajectory. Derek presented the vision for the next chapter with the particular confidence of someone who has been told his whole life that his confidence is his greatest asset. The slide deck was polished. The numbers were well organized. They were also incomplete. 30 minutes in, one of the lead investors, a woman in a gray suit who had said very little, asked about the referral partnership revenue projections. She had clearly done her homework. She cited specific line items. My father began to explain. And that was when the Hartwell Group's senior partner, who was sitting 2 seats from me, said, quietly, and without any particular drama, that he wanted to flag a procedural point before they went further. He explained the signing structure. He explained the transfer clause. He explained that as of the current date, the agreements remained with me individually, and that his firm had paused engagement with the transition pending resolution. The room did the thing rooms do when information lands that changes the shape of everything. People shifted. The woman in the gray suit wrote something down. My father looked at the table. Derek looked at my father. I did not look at any of them. I looked at my hands. The investor meeting did not collapse dramatically. That's not how these things work in real life. What happened was more like a slow, expensive deflation. The lead investors asked for a recess. They asked for documentation. They asked several questions that my father answered carefully, and that Derek largely didn't answer at all, because he didn't have the information to answer them, because the information had always lived with me. In the hallway, during the recess, my father found me by the windows. He didn't yell. He's not a yeller. He does something more efficient than yelling. He gets very precise. You could have come to me, he said. I did come to you, I said. For 8 years. He was quiet. I built those partnerships, I said. I rebuilt the compliance structure. I brought in the reserve fund when you needed it. I have never asked you to acknowledge any of it publicly. I am asking you now to acknowledge it, in the only place that has ever mattered to you. He looked out the window at the city below. I watched his reflection in the glass. What do you want? He asked. I told him. I wanted my name on the firm. Not Derek's name, and then mine somewhere below it. Both of our names, at the same level, because that was what the actual contributions warranted. I wanted the $34,000 repaid in full within 60 days. I wanted a formal role structure that reflected what I actually did versus what Derek actually did, with compensation tied to that structure. And I wanted it documented and signed before the investors reconvened. He turned and looked at me the way parents look at children when they realize the child has become someone they didn't fully account for. Your mother, he started. My mother told me some people carry the torch and some hold the door, I said. I've been holding the door for a long time. I'm done with that. We went back into the meeting. I won't tell you it was graceful. My father is a proud man. And pride doesn't restructure itself cleanly. There were tense conversations. Derek, to his credit, when he was privately walked through the actual contract situation by his fiancée's father, who was a businessman and understood immediately what it meant, agreed that the arrangement needed to be formalized correctly. He said he hadn't known about the signing structure. I believed him. Like I said, Derek is not calculating. He just doesn't look at the parts of the house he didn't build. Renata was on the phone with me for most of that afternoon. The Hartwell Group's senior partner turned out to be genuinely decent, the kind of person who has been in enough rooms to know when something isn't right and has enough security to say so. He told me privately, while we waited for my father's attorney to review the restructuring language, that the work I had done on the partnership agreements was the primary reason his firm had renewed. He said he had always assumed I had more authority in the firm than it appeared. I thanked him and did not tell him how much that sentence cost me to hear. By 5 o'clock, we had a restructuring term sheet signed by my father, witnessed by both attorneys, and acknowledged by the investor group as a condition of continuing due diligence. My name was on the firm. The repayment schedule was formalized. The role structures were documented. I drove home in the same silence I had driven home in after the engagement party. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of something ending. The silence of something finally becoming what it should have been. My mother called that evening. She had heard from my father. She was quiet on the line for longer than I expected, and then she said, "I didn't realize." I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't, not entirely, and I think she deserved the honesty more than the comfort. "I know," I said. She said she was proud of me. She said it in a small voice, the voice of someone who doesn't use those words very often, and knows it. I don't know yet what to do with that. I'm still figuring it out. Derek texted me the next morning. Just 3 sentences. He said he hadn't understood the full picture. He said he was sorry. He said he was glad I stayed. I read it twice. I saved it. I didn't respond that day, but I'm going to. Some things need a little time to be said correctly. What I want you to take from this is not the legal strategy or the investor meeting or any of the specific mechanics of how it unfolded. Those details belong to my situation, and your situation will be different, and the way through it will look different too. What I want you to take is this: patience is not the same as acceptance. I waited. I learned. I built. I documented. I said nothing when saying nothing was strategic, and I spoke clearly when speaking clearly was the only option left. I was not passive. I was precise. And there is a version of every room you've ever been locked out of that has a door you don't yet know exists. Find the door. Know your worth. Don't let anyone hand you an apron when you built the whole house. If this story reached you today, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. This story doesn't end here. Neither does yours.